The air in Sparta feels thick with smoke and iron, the kind that clings to your throat and tastes faintly of sweat and sacrifice. You stand at the edge of a flickering chamber where a woman groans in labour, her body trembling under the pressure of a world that doesn't care for softness. Around her, shadows move like judges. The flicker of torchlight makes the polished shields along the wall gleam like eyes, unblinking, expectant. You might imagine that this is a moment of joy, a birth, the start of something tender. But here, in ancient Sparta, a newborn's first breath is not a promise, it's a test. You probably won't survive this if you linger too long. Even your compassion might make you seem weak. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The baby's cry slices through the smoky silence. The midwife, strong-armed and expressionless, wraps the infant in a linen cloth, checking its limbs with mechanical precision. No smile greets the sound of new life. The mother's eyes search for reassurance, but none comes. In this world, a child's value is measured in muscle, symmetry, and potential, not love. The midwife carries the newborn to the elders waiting at the doorway. You can almost feel the chill when one of them, old and severe, lifts the child as if weighing destiny itself. Historians still argue whether this ritual was as systematic as later writers claimed, but the truth is simple enough. If the baby looked weak, it didn't get to stay. Outside, the night hums with the buzz of torches and low chanting. Somewhere beyond, the Eurotas River gleams like a blade. The infant's fate will be decided by morning. If deemed imperfect, it will be carried to Mount Taygetus, a rocky cradle of death, where countless tiny bones turn to dust long before anyone thought to question the meaning of strength. The logic was cruel, but precise. To protect Sparta, the weak must fall away so the strong can multiply. You can almost hear the echo of that justification through history. Every empire has whispered the same words in one form or another, and yet, as you look closer at the mother, sweating, shaking, her eyes hollow with dread, you realise she's not merely a vessel for the next warrior. She's part of the system that consumes her too. Spartan women were told their duty was sacred, their bodies designed to bear heroes. But what choice does sanctity offer when even your womb belongs to the state? The mother's silence feels heavier than the clang of any sword. You wonder if she ever dared to hope for a daughter instead. A small rebellion against the cycle of blood and bronze. The soldiers waiting outside don't see tragedy. They see arithmetic. One more potential soldier. One more heartbeat for the phalanx. Sparta's entire society was built like a living engine. Each human reduced to a function. Men to fight, women to breed, children to prove worthy of survival. You might think of eugenics as a modern horror, but Sparta wrote the earlier script. Philosophers like Plutarch later romanticized it, calling it discipline, civic virtue, purity. But even they could not quite wash away the scent of something colder, something you can almost feel pressing against your chest as the torches flicker lower. The chamber grows quiet. The baby's cry fades, swallowed by distance. The mother stares into the dark, her fingers gripping the empty cloth. For a moment, you think she might scream, but she doesn't. In Sparta, grief is a private indulgence, one she can't afford. The midwife murmurs a flat blessing, half ritual, half resignation, and leaves her alone with the shadows. Outside, the city's walls gleam under the moonlight like the ribs of some great beast, alive and hungry. Tomorrow the mother will rise, wash her face, and begin training again. Because here, women are expected to be strong, not for themselves, but for the sons they might yet produce. The next birth could be better. The next one might be perfect. You can almost hear her whisper it, over and over, as if faith could bend genetics. The candle burns low, the smoke curling toward the ceiling like a prayer the gods have long stopped answering. You wake to the sound of sandals striking the dirt, a steady rhythm echoing through the training fields. The women of Sparta move in formation, their bodies glistening in the sun, their hair tied back, their eyes hard as bronze. It's not what you'd expect from the women of the ancient world. They don't wear veils or hide behind walls. They run, leap, wrestle, and hurl javelins across the open air. The state wants them strong, and so they are. muscled, sun-browned and unflinching. But don't mistake this freedom for equality. You soon realise that strength here isn't liberation, it's obligation. Their bodies are sculpted not for themselves but for the state's ultimate project, creating the perfect warrior. Spartan women were famously independent compared to their Greek sisters, yet even that independence had strings attached. While Athenian women were confined indoors, spinning wool and obeying their husbands, Spartan women were encouraged to eat well, train daily and speak boldly. It sounds empowering until you remember why. The stronger the mother, the stronger the child. That's the mantra that echoes in every gymnasium, every courtyard, every dusty path where girls run races under the watchful eyes of their elders. Historians still argue whether Spartan women genuinely enjoyed a higher status, or merely served as finely tuned instruments of the state's military ambitions. Either way, their worth began and ended in the strength of their sons. You can almost feel the contradiction pressing down on you as you watch a young girl being corrected by her trainer. Her stance isn't wide enough. Her throw lacks force. Again, the woman barks. The girl resets, jaw clenched. She's maybe 12, her limbs taut with effort, her mind already moulded by the idea that one day her womb must produce warriors who'll make her proud, or else prove her a failure. The concept of motherhood here is something alien. Sacred, yes, but transactional. You're not raising children, you're raising soldiers, and that makes tenderness dangerous. In a culture obsessed with strength, Spartan women were expected to laugh at pain. When their sons left for war, they handed them their shields with the legendary words, "Come back with it," or "on it." It sounds poetic when quoted in history books, but it was less a mother's love than a public performance of duty. Weakness, even emotional weakness, was treasonous. If a Spartan woman wept for her fallen child, she did so in silence. The community would not tolerate anything that threatened the myth of fearless motherhood. And if you think that sounds impossible, just look at the collective conditioning we still accept centuries later. Different words, same pressures. There's something chilling about the way they train together, moving as one body. You catch a glimpse of their faces, focused, almost serene, as if they've long since surrendered any illusion of choice. A quirky historical detail often left out of textbooks. Spartan girls competed naked in athletic festivals, cheered by men who saw their bodies not as objects of desire, but as breeding stock on display. Strength was seductive only when it promised sons. Yet, oddly, these same women were among the most educated in Greece. They learned music, philosophy, and mathematics, not for their minds, but because an intelligent mother was thought to produce a clever soldier. Sparta's logic was chillingly complete. One woman catches your gaze. She's older, her hair streaked with silver, but her body is still iron-hard. She trains not because she must, but because it's the only rhythm she's ever known. Her name might be lost to history, but her type endures in fragments. Gorgo, the wife of King Leonidas, who famously told a foreign woman, "We are the only ones who give birth to men." You can almost hear the pride in her voice, but also the fatigue. To be revered as the mother of men meant never being allowed to simply be a woman. As the sun sinks behind Mount Taygetus, the women form a circle, chanting a victory song. The rhythm is hypnotic, the words ancient. You feel it in your bones, the pulse of a culture that turned biology into national service. For these women, pregnancy wasn't a private joy, it was a patriotic act. They were temples of flesh, consecrated to the god of war. And somewhere in that twilight between pride and oppression, they built a kind of strength the world still misunderstands. Not gentle resilience, but weaponized endurance. The night wind sweeps through the olive groves carrying the scent of sweat and dust. In the distance, the men's barracks echo with laughter and steel. The women remain where they are, stretching in the fading light, faces calm, eyes unblinking. They have been told their entire lives that their strength is the foundation of Sparta, and maybe it is. But as you watch them fade into shadow, you can't help wondering what it must feel like to be both the pedestal and the prisoner. By dawn, the city hums with purpose again. You walk through narrow streets where dust rises like morning incense, and you sense that every footstep, every word spoken serves one unshakable goal, preserving the bloodline of strength. Here, love is not a feeling but an equation, and marriage, a kind of state-sanctioned experiment. You soon learn that in Sparta, couples were paired not for affection, but for anatomy. The assembly encouraged unions based on physical excellence, not passion. If two people could produce a child with broader shoulders or faster reflexes, then they belonged together, whether they liked it or not. You can almost hear the metallic click of logic overriding emotion. It's not romance, it's breeding strategy. The ritual of pairing wasn't about companionship, it was about calculation. Spartan lawgivers, especially the legendary Lycurgus, supposedly designed this system to sculpt the perfect citizen. Men didn't marry young. They were expected to live in military barracks until their 30s, eating with comrades, sleeping among weapons. Marriage, when it came, was arranged with military precision. The women were chosen for their strength, health, and beauty, though the latter was a practical consideration. Beauty was seen as an outward sign of internal harmony, the way symmetry might reveal superior genetics. Historians still argue whether Lycurgus ever actually codified these practices, or if later Spartans exaggerated his laws to justify their own cruelty, but the spirit of the system remained. Personal choice was irrelevant when the state demanded perfection. You watch as two families negotiate a match. It looks almost ceremonial. Gifts exchanged, names spoken, oaths recited. The bride stands silently, her eyes fixed on the horizon, while the groom's father discusses lineage, reputation, and past athletic victories. Love isn't mentioned once. The elders murmur approvingly, calculating outcomes the way modern breeders might discuss racehorses. And just when you think it couldn't get colder, someone brings up improvement rights. Yes, in certain cases a man could allow another, stronger, faster, better, to father a child with his wife for the good of the state. Spartan society cloaked such arrangements in patriotic virtue, calling them acts of civic sacrifice. It's one of those facts so absurd it feels like satire, yet it happened. Even Plutarch, usually fond of Spartan discipline, admitted it made outsiders shudder. You can't help but wonder what that felt like, the quiet humiliation of being treated like part of an experiment. Did they rationalize it as duty? Did they lie awake, listening to footsteps in the dark, wondering whether their child would look too much like someone else? In this strange calculus of blood and muscle, jealousy had no place. A man who loved too much risked being mocked for weakness. A woman who hesitated risked being branded disobedient. The body was the state's property, and intimacy its instrument. One quirky detail that might make you smirk despite yourself. Spartan weddings were deliberately awkward. The bride's head was shaved, and she was dressed in a man's cloak and sandals before being carried off by her groom in the dark. It sounds almost comedic, but it was deeply symbolic. Her transformation from maiden to partner in Sparta's breeding machine. The shaved head erased her femininity, making her less lover, more comrade. When the husband visited her later, it was often in secrecy, under cover of night, to preserve the illusion that even marriage couldn't distract a Spartan from his military duties. But that's a story for another night. Well, actually, for the next few paragraphs. For now, you sit at a banquet celebrating another strategic union. The guests laugh, drink wine, and boast of future offspring as if drafting soldiers before birth. One man raises a toast, to strong mothers and stronger sons. The hall echoes with approval, and for a fleeting moment you feel the pulse of a civilization convinced of its righteousness. They truly believe they are perfecting humanity. And maybe that belief, more than their spears or shields, is what made Sparta so terrifying. As the torches burn lower, you catch sight of one young woman slipping quietly away from the feast. Her face is unreadable. Maybe she's imagining the child she's expected to bear. Maybe she's just dreaming of a night without the weight of destiny pressing on her chest. Either way, the stars above Sparta are cold and unblinking, like 1,000 watching eyes ensuring that even in love, or whatever passes for it here, no one escapes the state's gaze. The ritual of pairing has done its work. Another match sealed, another life conscripted before conception. You can almost hear the silent march of generations, each bred to be stronger, faster, more obedient than the last. And as you walk away through the sleeping city, you realize that in Sparta, perfection isn't just an ideal. It's a prison, and every heartbeat inside it sounds the same. Night falls again, and with it comes a strange silence. You walk past rows of stone houses, low and square, their windows glowing faintly with firelight. Inside, you sense the uneasy rhythm of hidden lives. Sparta is a city built on secrecy, and nowhere is that more literal than in its marriages. You pause outside one of these homes where a young man moves like a shadow through the alley, cloak drawn tight around his shoulders. He glances left and right before slipping through the door. It's not an affair, at least not by their standards. It's his wife he's visiting. In Sparta, husbands didn't live with their wives. They came at night, in secret, like thieves in their own homes. You can almost hear the floorboards creak under the weight of all that repression. The reason for these furtive visits is simple and cold. Spartan men belonged first to the army, not to their households. Their loyalty was measured in formation drills, not affection. If they wanted to see their wives, they had to sneak away from the barracks under the cover of darkness. It sounds romantic in a twisted way. Two lovers meeting in secret, but you quickly realise it wasn't about passion at all. It was part of the state's grand design. The idea was that limited contact kept desire burning, producing stronger offspring, a strange mix of discipline and superstition wrapped in ritual. Historians still argue whether this truly improved breeding outcomes, or if it was simply another way to ensure that men never forgot who owned them, the state, not their families. Inside, the candlelight trembles. The wife sits on the edge of a wooden bed, hair newly shorn from her wedding night, the scent of olive oil still on her skin. She doesn't speak when her husband enters. Words aren't part of this ritual. They meet halfway, strangers bound by obligation, and when it's over, he's gone before the first rooster cries. You imagine her lying there afterward, staring at the ceiling, her heart neither full nor empty, just quiet. Because love here is a luxury, and luxury is weakness. It's easy to think the system was all cruelty and control, but there's an odd tenderness buried somewhere in it. Some couples, over time, formed real affection. Others developed secret signals, small knocks on the wall, hidden trinkets exchanged when no one was watching. A fragment of human rebellion in a place that outlawed softness. You can almost smile at the image. A soldier sneaking back to camp at dawn, carrying not just his shield, but the scent of his wife's hair hidden under his armour. That kind of defiance, however small, might be the most Spartan thing of all. The oddest part? This secrecy wasn't just tolerated, it was encouraged. The idea was that children conceived under these circumstances would inherit their parents' vitality and passion, born of longing rather than comfort. You can hear the philosophers of the time rationalising it. The strong are forged in restraint. It's the kind of saying that sounds noble, until you realise it means generations of people were denied the basic freedom to love openly. There's one quirky tale that always surfaces when you talk about these nighttime visits. A Spartan woman once joked that her husband, sneaking to her house each night, grew so nimble from climbing walls that he was fitter than the younger recruits. It's the kind of dry humour that could only exist in a place where emotional survival depended on irony. You imagine her whispering it to her friends at the communal baths, the laughter quick and hushed because even jokes here were a form of resistance. Outside, the night grows colder. The soldier pulls his cloak tighter as he returns to the barracks, his footsteps echoing softly in the empty streets. In Sparta, this quiet return is a kind of victory. He has fulfilled his duty both to his wife and his country. Tomorrow he'll stand in formation again, spear in hand, eyes fixed ahead. And she will rise with the dawn, wash herself in cold water, and train her body once more. Preparing, always preparing, for the next night the door creaks open. You can't help but feel the haunting beauty of it all. The romance stripped bare, the yearning buried under discipline. The city hums with control, but somewhere in that hum, you sense a pulse of defiance. Every whispered meeting, every stolen hour is a reminder that no matter how tightly the state tries to regulate desire, it can't quite extinguish it. The human heart, inconvenient as it is, still beats behind the iron mask. And that sound, faint and steady, is the one thing Sparta could never truly train away. Morning brings judgment. You follow the path leading out of the city toward a ridge overlooking the Eurotas Valley, where the air smells of pine and iron. The cries of infants drift faintly on the wind, a sound both natural and horrifying in its setting. The elders of Sparta, wrapped in crimson cloaks, stand in a semicircle around a wooden platform. One by one, mothers approach, each carrying a newborn wrapped in wool. It's not a ceremony of celebration, it's a tribunal. The child's future will be decided not by love or chance, but by the cold logic of perfection. You watch as one of the elders raises a hand, and suddenly you understand what the word selection really means in a place like this. The process is brutal in its simplicity. The baby is unwrapped and examined for signs of strength or deformity. Straight limbs, clear eyes, firm cries, these are good omens. Weak muscles, twisted bones, or an uncertain heartbeat mean something else entirely. If the elders nod, the child is returned to its mother. If they shake their heads, the midwife steps forward, and the air seems to freeze. The condemned child is taken away, carried up the rocky slope of Mount Taygetus, where it will be left among the stones. Historians still argue whether this was truly as systematic as ancient writers claimed, or partly propaganda from later centuries. But bones have been found, and even if the scale was smaller than legend, the principle remains chillingly real. Sparta decided who deserved to live. You can almost hear the justification whispered across the centuries. Better one life lost than a nation weakened. The elders would say they were preventing suffering, that it was merciful to end a frail child's life early. But mercy here feels like a word carved from stone, beautiful from a distance, unyielding up close. The mother's face tells the truth her lips cannot speak. Her hands tremble as the midwife pulls the bundle away. She does not plead, she cannot. To show sorrow would be seen as rebellion, weakness unbecoming of a Spartan woman. And so she stands, her body still, her heart breaking in silence. You think of how strange it must feel to live in a society where compassion is treason. These mothers are praised for their strength, but their strength has been twisted into obedience. They are taught to believe that every loss is noble, that their suffering feeds the greater good. It's the kind of psychological gymnastics that would make any modern therapist faint. Yet somehow, it worked. The state survived for centuries on that very conditioning. There's an eerie detail from ancient accounts that often gets overlooked. The infants deemed unworthy weren't necessarily killed outright. Some were left exposed in the wild, where strangers, often helots, the enslaved class, might secretly rescue them. A few, it's said, were raised as servants or even sold to foreigners. Imagine that. Children rejected by Sparta, later returning as mercenaries, blades for hire, fighting the very empire that abandoned them. There's a grim poetry in that. The elder leading today's selection, his face as weathered as the stones beneath him, finally speaks. His voice is low, steady, untroubled. "For the good of the polis," he says, and the mothers nod as if agreeing to a trade they never signed. You can almost feel the collective numbness, the social anesthesia required to keep a people functional amid so much loss. The weak are gone, the strong remain, and the machine turns on. As the mothers descend the slope, the city below looks almost peaceful. Children who passed inspection are already being swaddled in red cloth, the colour of Sparta's army, as if to remind everyone that they belong to the state first and their families second. One woman whispers something to her newborn, a private promise smuggled into a public ritual. Maybe she says, "Live, my son." Maybe she says nothing at all. You stay there long after the last cry fades, staring at the path winding up toward Taygetus. The sun climbs higher, and for a brief, disorienting moment, it looks almost beautiful. The golden light on the mountains, the breeze carrying the smell of thyme. And then you remember what's buried under those stones. Beauty and horror, locked together in perfect symmetry. Sparta would have approved. The mothers who return from Taygetus walk differently. Their backs are straight, their faces expressionless, but you can sense it. The hollowness that lingers behind their eyes, like a wound sealed too neatly. The city greets them with indifference. No one comforts them. No one asks. To grieve publicly would be to reject Sparta's creed, and rejection carries its own quiet punishment. So they return to their routines, training, weaving, supervising servants, as though nothing happened. Yet, if you watch closely, you notice the small betrayals. A pause too long at the sound of another baby's cry. A flicker of the hand brushing the air where a child once was. These are the ghosts of Sparta. The women who learn to bury love deeper than any grave. In the communal baths, whispers ripple through the steam. The women speak in fragments, half stories, half code. One says she heard her child's cry echo through the hills days after the ceremony. Another swears that sometimes on cold mornings she sees shadows moving along the mountain as if the gods themselves are gathering what Sparta discards. They do not weep, but their silences are heavy enough to bend the air. Historians still argue whether Spartan women truly accepted these losses without protest, or if the chroniclers, mostly men, simply refused to record their grief. After all, history rarely writes about tears unless they serve a cause. One woman in particular catches your attention. Her name is Mira, though it might as well be any name, any century. She lost a child 3 winters ago. Since then, she's become a master at pretending. Every dawn she trains with younger women, her movements sharp and efficient. She laughs when others laugh, eats when others eat. But at night she visits the edge of the ureters and leaves small offerings, bits of honey, pressed flowers, scraps of wool. It's her way of marking a life the city erased. The quirky detail: honey was considered sacred to Artemis Orthia, the goddess who protected childbirth. Even in this militarized world, traces of the old feminine faith survive, gods of nurture hiding beneath the armor of discipline. One evening, as the sun bleeds into the horizon, Mira finds herself walking toward the mountain path again. The rocks cut into her sandals, but she doesn't stop. She just stands there, staring upward, her face unreadable. Maybe she's searching for a sign. Maybe she's just remembering. There's something profoundly human about her stillness, an act of rebellion hidden in plain sight. To stand there, to remember what she's been told to forget, is to defy the very core of Spartan logic, and in that defiance she becomes more dangerous than any sword. Back in the city, the younger women joke about future sons, about whose child will grow tallest or fastest. The laughter sounds forced, but no one dares to stop it. The cycle must continue. The men in the barracks expect wives to be proud, not mourners. They write letters home filled with boasts of glory, never suspecting that behind every brave Spartan there's a woman who learned to silence her heart. It's almost poetic, in the darkest way possible. The state demands emotional perfection from its women so it can produce physical perfection in its men. You can almost feel the collective pressure, the emotional scaffolding holding this entire society upright. And yet, cracks appear. Every now and then, a mother refuses to remarry, or avoids pregnancy altogether. The records call them barren, cursed or defiant, but you sense something else, a quiet awakening. They have begun to see themselves not just as wombs for the state, but as human beings capable of their own choices, however small. A few philosophers later suggested that Spartan women's influence over men was immense, that they wielded power through motherhood and conversation. Maybe that's true, but power built on control isn't freedom, it's survival dressed in pride. The women know this, even if the men never will. Night deepens over the city. Mira returns home, her body sore, her hair damp with dew. She lies awake listening to the rustle of olive branches outside her window. Somewhere beyond, another mother stands at the same mountain's edge, whispering the same unspoken prayer. They will never meet, yet they are bound together in silent solidarity. The mothers of Sparta, the unseen architects of its cruelty and its endurance. The world will remember the men who fought at Thermopylae, but it will never know the women who bore the cost of perfection. The years pass, and the cries of newborns fade into the distant shouts of boys training in the fields. You walk toward the Agorge, the Spartan education and military training system, where the city's chosen children are transformed into soldiers. The smell of dust and sweat hangs thick in the air. Wooden spears clatter, voices bark commands, and laughter, if it can be called that, sounds more like the echo of defiance than joy. The boys are small, some barely 7, but already their faces are hardening. The mothers who once held them close now watch from afar, forbidden to interfere. Their children no longer belong to them. They belong to Sparta. This is where the perfect warriors are made. The boys sleep on reeds, eat coarse broth, and march barefoot until their feet callous like stone. They are taught to endure pain without flinching, to steal food when hungry but never get caught. For being caught, not hunger, is the true shame. Historians still argue whether the brutality of the Agorg has been exaggerated by later writers, but even the tamest accounts are chilling enough. Whips replace lullabies here, and tenderness is treated as infection. You watch one boy stumble during drills, his knee bleeding onto the dirt. The instructor doesn't move to help, neither do his peers. He stands again, trembling, and continues. The others nod approvingly. He's learning. The mothers watch from the shadows, their expressions unreadable. Among them stands Mira. Her second son was accepted, and though she feels a flicker of pride, it's swallowed by dread. She's been told her love must now take the form of pride alone. So she watches as the boy disappears into formation, chanting the same lines all Spartan boys learn: "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence is habit. You wonder whether they understand the words or simply repeat them until they replace their thoughts. There's a strange irony in how much the Agog depends on women's strength, even as it denies their tenderness. They are the ones who birthed these boys, fed them, taught them their first words, and now they must pretend to forget all that. The boys, in turn, are told their mothers are proud, that pain honours them. It's a cycle of emotional inversion that could only exist in a society allergic to weakness. Still, in their private moments, you can imagine these women whispering names the state would erase, holding scraps of fabric or small toys left behind. Their love hasn't vanished. It's just gone underground, like a root system surviving beneath stone. Among the drills, one ritual stands out. The boys compete in mock battles, sometimes until blood is drawn, sometimes until bones break. The prize isn't victory, it's endurance. A quirky anecdote from Plutarch tells of a Spartan boy who stole a fox cub and hid it under his cloak during inspection. When the fox began to tear at his belly, he kept silent until he died, earning admiration for his discipline. You can almost hear the grim pride in the instructor's voice retelling it. Pain, here, is not the enemy, it's the teacher. The Agog doesn't just shape warriors, it erases individuals. By the time these boys reach adulthood, they'll have learned to see themselves as limbs of a single body, the phalanx. Their lives are choreography, shield to shield, breath to breath, all emotion subsumed into formation. They will eat together, fight together, die together. And when they return home, if they do, they'll bring that same rhythm into every part of life, including love. Even tenderness must march in step. The mothers continue to watch, their sons shrinking into the horizon. One turns away first, then another. Mira lingers longest, her hand resting on her chest, fingers digging slightly into her tunic. She doesn't cry, she won't. Instead, she whispers something too soft for anyone else to hear, a promise maybe, or a goodbye. The sun dips lower, turning the fields gold and crimson. For a fleeting moment, the boys' bronze shields catch the light, reflecting it back toward the women like a cruel kind of halo. As you leave the training grounds, you realize that this entire city runs on sacrifice layered upon sacrifice. The men give their bodies, the women their hearts, and together they create a perfection that costs them everything human. Sparta's strength is not born of unity but of shared emptiness, a hollow devotion polished until it gleams. And yet, as night falls and the chants fade, you can almost sense the faintest resistance beneath the surface. A mother's love that refuses to die, no matter how much the state tries to train it out of her. The years keep grinding forward, and Sparta keeps demanding more. The boys have grown into warriors now, broad-shouldered, disciplined, almost statues carved from living flesh. But the machine that made them must continue, and that means new generations. You return to the women, to the courtyards where daughters now train beneath the same unforgiving sun. You might think these girls have it easier, that they are spared the soldier's path. But in Sparta, even girlhood is conscription. Their duty is to become the mothers of warriors, and that means perfection is still the only acceptable inheritance. In one training yard, a group of girls run races in linen tunics, their bare legs kicking up dust. The instructor shouts praises and insults in equal measure, his voice cracking like a whip. You watch as one girl stumbles, twisting her ankle. She bites her lip, refusing to cry, and forces herself upright. The others nod approvingly. Even the injured must prove worthy. Historians still argue whether Spartan girls truly enjoyed more freedom than women in other Greek city-states, or whether this was simply another disguise for control. After all, being free to run doesn't mean you're free to stop. Marriage here is a transaction dressed as ceremony. When a girl reaches her late teens, her name enters a list of eligible brides. The state watches her, her lineage, her health. Then, one evening, she's chosen, her fate sealed by a handshake between men who'll never bear the cost of that decision. Her father trades her as if trading grain, her worth measured in hips, stamina, and ancestral glory. You can almost hear the rustle of ledgers, the quiet arithmetic of lineage. The union isn't love, it's logistics. And if that sounds eerily modern, well, maybe humanity hasn't evolved as much as it likes to think. Inside one of the stone homes, you find a bride preparing for this ritual. Her mother, Mira, stands beside her, combing her daughter's hair one last time. There's tenderness in the motion, but also resignation. Mira knows what comes next. The shaving of the head, the dark cloak, the secrecy of the wedding night. The daughter looks into a polished bronze mirror, her face calm but distant, as though she's practicing detachment. "Be strong," Mira whispers, though her voice trembles, "and proud." It's the same script passed down for generations. Spartan motherhood is an endless performance, and every act ends the same way, with loss. A strange and little-known fact flickers in your mind. Spartan women could own property and inherit wealth, a rarity in ancient Greece. Some controlled vast estates while their husbands lived and died in the barracks. Outsiders envied their autonomy, but it came with a catch. This independence was never meant for pleasure, it was for efficiency. The women were managers of an empire built on war. They balanced accounts, oversaw slaves, ensured farms produced enough to feed the soldiers. Their strength served the state's appetite, not their own. Later that evening, as the wedding procession passes through the streets, you see the flickering torches illuminate the bride's face. She walks barefoot, eyes forward, lips tight. No music plays, no laughter rings out. The people murmur blessings that sound more like orders. She's not a bride, but an investment. Somewhere behind her, Mira watches silently, her face hidden by her veil. When the couple disappears into the shadows, she finally exhales, a sound more sigh than sob. You wonder whether she feels relief that her daughter will live, or dread that she will now join the same cycle of endurance. Probably both. The quirky side of all this is how outsiders once mocked Sparta for it. Other Greeks called their women shameless, too bold, too muscular, too outspoken. Athenian playwrights joked that Spartan wives ruled their husbands, and perhaps in a narrow sense they did. But power in Sparta was never freedom. It was just a different form of servitude, gilded with discipline. To be bold was expected, to be silent was shameful, to be emotional was forbidden. Even rebellion had to look respectable. As you walk back through the quiet streets, you hear the low hum of a lullaby, rare, almost forbidden. It's Mira again, singing softly to herself. Maybe she's remembering her first child, or maybe she's trying to protect the last spark of gentleness left inside her. The melody drifts into the night, fragile as ash, but it doesn't fade. For the first time, you sense something shifting in her. Beneath the layers of obedience, a quiet fire begins to burn, a realization that even if the state owns her body, it cannot fully master her mind. The next generation might still be born of duty, but perhaps, just perhaps, one of them will inherit her quiet defiance. The moon rises high over the rooftops, cold and indifferent. The soldiers train in the distance, their chants merging with the rhythm of Mira's song. Sparta sleeps, armoured in silence, unaware that its strongest weapon has always been the women it tried hardest to control. By now, the rhythm of Sparta feels eternal, training, breeding, dying, repeating. Yet even the hardest bronze begins to crack. You sense it first in whispers, small dissonant notes that ripple beneath the marching chants. The perfection Sparta worships is starting to rot from within. The soldiers who return from endless wars come back quieter, emptier, their eyes dulled by what they've seen. The women, meanwhile, grow sharper, more aware that their supposed freedom is just another kind of chain. Mira, older now, sees the city with new eyes. Her daughter's belly swells with a child destined for another inspection, another judgment, and somewhere deep inside she realizes she can no longer pretend that the system is sacred. It's simply cruel. Sparta's walls still gleam in the sun, but inside them, unease is growing. The population is shrinking. The obsession with purity has backfired. Fewer births, more deaths. The gene pool, if you can call it that, has become a puddle. Historians still argue whether this demographic collapse was caused by war, by pride, or by sheer mathematical arrogance. But the truth is simpler. When you worship perfection long enough, you eventually run out of people who qualify. Mira hears the elders whisper about it during the market gatherings, how they need more children, more strong mothers. Some suggest loosening the rules, others tighten them further, fearing weakness will seep in if mercy is shown. That's how every empire dies, strangled by its own ideals. Meanwhile, the women start talking, not in open rebellion, but in small, dangerous ways. At the baths, they question the purity laws. In the fields, they mutter about the babies who might have lived. One evening, Mira hears a neighbour say something unthinkable. Perhaps the gods don't care for strength. Perhaps they prefer love. The words hang in the air like contraband. Everyone freezes, glancing around to make sure no one overheard. Then, slowly, the conversation resumes, quieter but braver. This is how rebellion begins, not with swords, but with whispers. You watch Mira teach her granddaughter a secret lesson. The girl is small, fierce-eyed, with the same steady gaze Mira once had. "They'll tell you you're strong," Mira says, brushing the child's hair. "Believe it. But remember, strength isn't the same as obedience." The child nods, confused but listening. You feel something shift, subtle but seismic. For the first time, strength is being redefined, stolen back from the state and returned to the soul. There's a strange irony in how the very system that tried to suppress emotion ends up breeding resilience of another kind. Spartan women learn to maneuver power like invisible blades, sharp, silent, and always close. They manage estates, influence policy through their sons, and trade quietly among themselves. The men think they control everything, but it's the women who keep the machine running. And somewhere in that invisible labour you find the first cracks of revolution. A quirky historical detail gives you a hint of what's coming. By the later centuries, Spartan women owned nearly 2/5 of the land. Outsiders were scandalised, calling them decadent, even dangerous. But that accumulation of property was no accident. It was inheritance stacked over generations of widows and mothers managing what men could not. When your husband dies in war and your sons die beside him, what remains is power by default. Mira, like so many others, becomes a quiet matriarch in a city built to ignore her. The irony is perfect. The breeding system meant to control women ends up giving them control. But power doesn't heal, it just changes the texture of the wound. Mira walks through the agora one morning and notices something chilling. The children playing in the square are fewer than before. The laughter that once rang like birdsong now sounds sparse, almost hollow. Even perfection can't fill an empty cradle. She feels the wind shift through the streets, carrying with it the faint scent of decay beneath the scent of olive oil and bronze. The end has already begun. It's just polite enough not to announce itself. As the sun sets, Mira stands again by the river, the same place where she once offered honey to forgotten gods. She feels no anger now, only clarity. The dream of perfection was never about strength. It was about fear. Fear of failure, fear of fragility, fear of what it means to be human. She watches the water flow past, carrying reflections of a city that believes it can shape nature itself. And she knows that when the river changes course, as all rivers do, Sparta will crumble with it. But perhaps that's not tragedy. Perhaps it's mercy finally finding its way home. The torches burn low and the city murmurs in its sleep. You can almost hear the ghosts of the mothers, their lullabies mingling with the clang of distant spears. Sparta, the perfect machine, doesn't know it yet, but its heart has already stopped beating. The dawn that rises over Sparta now feels different, quieter, heavier, as though even the gods have grown tired of watching. You wander through the same streets that once rang with chants and drills, but the rhythm is gone. The courtyards where children trained now stand half empty. The clang of shields has softened into a distant echo. The perfect city has become a relic of its own legend. The obsession that once fueled it, purity, discipline, strength, has drained the life out of everything it touched. And yet somehow the myth endures. You can still feel its ghost brushing your shoulder, whispering that perfection is worth any cost. Mira is old now, her hair pale as ash. She walks with a cane carved from olive wood, her back straight despite the years. Around her, the younger women gather for advice. They see her not as a mother or widow, but as something larger, a witness. She remembers the births, the judgments, the soldiers, the disappearances. She remembers the lies that were told as truth, that cruelty was virtue, that silence was honour, that the strongest survived because the gods willed it so. And as she looks at these young faces, she realises that the gods had nothing to do with it. Men did this, systems did this, fear did this. Beyond the city, the world has changed. Athens rises and falls, empires bloom and collapse. But Sparta's name remains a symbol, one that history can't decide whether to admire or pity. Historians still argue whether the Spartan experiment was noble discipline or collective madness, whether it forged heroes or erased humanity. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. The Spartans believed they could design morality the way they designed their warriors, by breeding it, training it, purging what didn't fit. But perfection is a paradox. The closer you chase it, the further it runs. One afternoon, Mira's granddaughter brings her a small clay toy, a soldier moulded crudely by hand. "For the baby," she says softly, her own belly round with life. Mira smiles faintly. She knows the child will not face the same trials. The city's laws have softened, its rituals fading into memory. But even now she can feel the residue of the old creed, like smoke that lingers long after the fire dies. It's there in every mother who fears her child won't measure up, in every body judged by its symmetry, in every culture that still equates worth with strength. Sparta may be gone, but its echo still shapes the human heart. You wander further through time, through centuries of interpretation. Modern scholars, athletes, even militaries still invoke Sparta's name as a badge of honor: discipline, fitness, endurance. The irony is almost laughable. They forget what it cost. The cold nights, the mothers at the mountain's edge, the love starved out of an entire people. Perfection, it turns out, doesn't die. It just rebrands. You can see it in the glossy fitness ads, in genetic engineering labs, in national slogans that praise purity with prettier words. The old ghosts of Sparta still find new uniforms to wear. Mira spends her final days near the river. Sometimes she hums the old lullabies that once filled the dark, and children stop to listen, though none know the words anymore. One evening, as the light fades, she sees a hawk circling over Taygetus. Its wings cut the air with effortless precision, strong but not perfect, and in that imperfection, she finds peace. For the first time, she understands that beauty was never about flawlessness. It was about endurance, about the courage to love what breaks. When the city finally forgets her name, the land remembers. Wildflowers bloom again on the slopes where infants were once left to die. The Eurotas still flows, washing over bones and memories alike. The stone foundations crumble, the statues erode, but life, messy, uneven, miraculous, goes on. You stand there, breathing it in, realizing that humanity's greatest strength has never been perfection. It's the refusal to surrender to it. And somewhere, deep in the quiet of your own chest, a heartbeat answers hers, steady, imperfect, defiantly alive. Now let the dust settle. The fires of Sparta fade, the chants quiet, and the sound of sandals marching on stone drifts away into nothing. You're left standing at the riverbank again, the same place where it all began. The beginning, the endings, the choices no one wanted to make. The air feels softer now, the cruelty blunted by time. You can almost hear the lullabies that once trembled against the night, still echoing faintly beneath the hum of the earth. Take a slow breath. Feel it move through you, steady and patient. The story you've just walked through wasn't about warriors or victories. It was about survival. The quiet, persistent kind. The kind that lives inside mothers who refuse to forget. Inside daughters who dared to question. Inside anyone who's ever been told to be stronger than they felt. As the night deepens, the river keeps flowing. Never perfect, always beautiful. Let it carry you somewhere gentler. You've survived Sparta tonight. Rest now.